human rights abuse. This organization was formed by a group of victims of non-consensual human experimentation involving electromagnetic and neurological weapon testing. Cheryl is recognized by the United Nations as an expert on non-lethal technology. Cheryl has been on the CNN program to explain the use of directed energy weapons on the U.S. citizens. She has co-authored several books, including an international campaign to end human rights violations involving classified new weapons of mass destruction, electromagnetic and neurological technologies. Recently, she authored 2 articles for the UFO magazine, February-March 2003 and April-May 2003. It's called Cover Stories Torn Away, New Evidence of Active Mind Control. At this time, I'd like to introduce Cheryl Welsh.
Hi, thank you. I guess most people, I'll assume that most people know about mind control generally, and I'll just briefly overview that I have this human rights group, Citizens Against Human Rights Abuse, that I formed because I was targeted myself, and it drastically changed my life, and it's not something I want to live with. I want it out of my life in my lifetime, if at all possible. And so that's why I've been going to law school and trying to get mainstream press interested in this, trying to get human rights people to take this seriously. And so most of my information is posted on my website. I'll try to be brief and not use a lot of citations here, but I really try to stick to the facts and support what I say. And a lot of experts, basically you don't have to believe me, a victim. You can believe experts now. What I'll do is refer to what the experts are saying. And this will be a little disjointed because I wanted to use new information that's not on my website or that I've said before. And so I'm not as familiar with it, but I'll try to get through it. And basically what I wanted to cover with this lecture was I started researching, about 15 years ago on this, and the good news is that there's a lot of new information out there, and at that time, I believe that they have, they've really, like the atomic bomb, they've really decoded the brain. They decoded the atom, they've figured it out, and my theory is that they've decoded the brain and it's really classified. And so I've got a lot of supporting evidence. I can't support that theory, but I can. Basically now, scientists are saying that it's feasible, and neuroscience is the hot topic these days, like genetic engineering was. Well, if you do a survey of the articles out there, they're talking about neuroscience, and there's a lot of government funding, and so I want to talk about that today. The new, also what I think is really new and exciting information is that probably a lot of you saw the 2002 Naval Studies Board, that report on the assessment of non-lethal weapons. There's a section in there on electromagnetic weapons, which is, I concentrate on the victims who feel that they are targeted remotely without implants and via this electromagnetic technology. That's kind of what I've really concentrated on, because that's what I feel is happening to me. And this report, I'll talk about it later, but basically for years, just briefly, the Russians have been saying that there are biological effects from electromagnetic energy, and that it affects you psychologically and biologically. And the U.S. has always said, there's only thermal effects, and this has been the big argument for years and years and years. And so over the years, slowly, it's a long story, but basically, to make a long story short, the U.S. government has changed 180 degrees. They're now saying we're funding this research. There's vast, the potential for weapons is vast. I mean, it's just a really great quote. So you've got neuroscience and electromagnetic technology. It's you know, my 15 years of research, it's just all still the same. It holds true. And so I know this is not real flowing, but I wanted to make, so I'll go over a couple of new articles that a lot of people, the question you get is, where's your proof? And they want proof. How do you remotely target somebody? How can they haven't decoded the brain? You know, that's the main sticking point, that you can't get mainstream press to cover this issue. It's UFO Magazine will cover it. More open-minded people will cover it. I have human rights experts who I network with, who off the record will support me. And you know, like even Dr. Patel did go public in supporting my work and saying that it needed further investigation. That's on my website. I won't go into it now, but so I've always approached it over the years. I've tried to find articles that show that they can do it via satellite. So I've got a couple of articles new that show where the technology is going. But I'm changing my approach. I guess the main point is you can't convince people. I mean, we don't have the evidence. Obviously, it's classified, and I can prove to you that this is a technology that the government really wants. Everybody wants to be able to control somebody's mind as a weapon. We know the Russians have been, over the years, there's newspaper articles. It's pretty well documented that the Russians are really researching this area. You know, it's not rocket science to put it together that there could be, and there's a strong possibility, you can make that circumstantial case that there probably are mind control weapons out there. And then this last year I took a international human rights law class, and I specifically wanted to know, are we going to have a remedy? Because in the United States we know about the radiation victims, and we know that it took them 50 years before they declassified those government documents, before we got evidence, and before they were called paranoid for years and years and years, and finally they have the evidence. Well, I'd like to change that story with our situation, what we're alleging, that we're targeted with these mind control weapons. And so I'm trying to learn from them, and I know that there's no U.S. laws that even after the radiation victims, that big expose in 1993, to this day there has been no law passed to prevent that from happening again. And I have some quotes in here where, in fact, there's even more secrecy, and there's even more chance of it happening again. But there's no laws on a national level, which, you know, I went to law school. I was pretty naive. I really thought I would have a court case someday, and that the government would pay for this. And but I was wrong. I'm pretty sure that I've learned a lot from the radiation victims. I've read a lot of books, and really you can really learn lessons from it's repeating. History is repeating. So on an international level, I was hoping that with the International Criminal Court, with the Nuremberg Code, we know that, you know, there's precedent. You know that it's on an international level, human experimentation without consent. It's just very well known, and we'd have a good chance. But that's not how the law works in the international. It's a long story, but the short answer is that it's doubtful that there will be a remedy for mind control victims on an international level without major changes. The Nuremberg, of course, is just a code. It's not a legal criminal law. It's nothing. Perpetrators can't be punished. It's just not a practical solution. So, you know, I'm changing my focus again, and so my focus now is to get mainstream people that can help us to listen, to find the evidence so that they believe us. And that's why the studies, the medical studies with Dr. Bird, and finding the evidence. But I believe that's a long shot. Also, because of the money that everybody's tried, nobody has been successful yet. So I'm just trying to tighten up, because I think it's not rocket science. I think that normal human being, mainstream, I believe mainstream will buy it if we give them the facts. If we, I think we've got enough facts. I guess that would be the good news, is that I really feel that we have good evidence, that a good circumstantial case to prove, that you can convince people so that they will help you. It was a rarity to get it took somebody like Dr. Bird, who was open-minded to this, to even, you approach normal scientists and you are written off as, this just is not possible. But if you take a close look, and I'll try to just briefly go over a couple of really good articles I found that I think you can use when you approach people for help, for solution, I don't believe we have to, I think the point to hammer home to people is you can use the history of the radiation victims, and you can say, that's what I'm doing with the UN, my UN work. You can write out, you can say radiation victims had to wait for the government to declassify it. I mean, it's not rocket science to show that they didn't get help until the US government declassified these documents. It would be the same in our situation. And I've got tons of articles here where the non-lethal weapons are heavily classified since the 1960s. And so the message is, when they say, where's the proof? You change the focus to, we will never be able to get the proof. And I don't believe we really could. I mean, it's just not. How can somebody who, has got this very sophisticated technology, if you accept that this is going on, how could you expect the victims to get the proof? And that's what I think there's a chance at the human rights level, the people that are working on the non-lethal weapons, that there's a few that are really open-minded and would have the power to take this into account, and I think they're aware of it, but I don't know, just putting two and two together. The victims are really scattered. There's a huge group in Russia, but people are coming forward from all over the world, and somehow the message has to gel that, gee, there could be something going on. The other big thing that I found that I was kind of surprised, I didn't expect to find, were the media, the problem with the media, and the fact that they don't ask the hard questions. They go for the general story, and I have a couple of really good examples that I wanted to tell you about. And the other big points that I was going to make today were that that I didn't really know before was that neuroscience research is very controlled information. The government really controls what they put out. And so I have a couple of examples of that, which was kind of a surprise to me, other than the mind control, of course. And of course, the electromagnetic radiation, that's well documented. That technology is, research is, mostly funded by the government, has been for years, and that's really heavily controlled. So you can see how the media has the general story that the government would be very happy that you believe, that this is science, mind control is science fiction, this is a conspiracy theory. And but I can refute that, and it's a long, slow process, but you really can factually show that it's wrong. So I'll start with a few examples. First, you probably all know that mind control really is considered a conspiracy theory. I'll give you a couple examples. It's just rampant. we are not above that level. We are considered a conspiracy. In the latest articles, I'll just give you one example. When I was on that CNN program, they also had ex-CIA Director James Woolsey, and I wrote to him and just to thought it was neat that I was on the same program with him, and I wrote him a little letter and I told him about this Russian mine technology, and I sent him some articles, and do you know about this? And he wrote back that he'd never heard of it. You know, and now all these, you know, it's just unbelievable because all of these non-lethal weapons are coming out, and okay, you know. So his line was, conspiracy theorists always seem to me to forget that we have A, First Amendment, B, two independent branches of the federal government outside the executive, and a federal system. So, you know, but it didn't work for the radiation victims. That would be my reply, which they would ignore. And just one more to show, if I can. Okay, here's a great one. Worldwide, it's a conspiracy theory. I mean, you say mind control, it's conspiracy. An article from January 2001. Maybe some of you know headline Paranoid, the top 10 conspiracies. Number 10, mind control. The American military conducted a series of mind control experiments in the 50s and 60s. And then it talks about Julianne McKinney's group, the Electronic Surveillance Project, founded to counteract and harassment and targeted by microwaves. Well, so that was in the London Independent newspaper. I mean, it's just, we have been, but I think that can be counteracted is the point that the other conspiracy up there, number one, was the JFK assassination. The good news is that 71% of the people, 73% think that there was more than one bullet that killed JFK. And of course we know a lot of people are convinced that there's something more to the story. So that's what we can do. That's all we can hope for. I don't think we can get the evidence. I don't think they're going to, just personally, I don't think they're going to let people know about it, and it's silent, and they can use it for years without anyone. It's a very powerful weapon. So I don't see why they would declassify it. Mary Ann had John Alexander at her last couple of conferences ago, and I guess you know him as a non-lethal weapons expert. Heard of him. He's been around for years. He would be, I'd like to give you one example of how the government either misinforms or consciously disinforms the public about mind control. In the 80s, he wrote that book, what's that book? Warrior's Edge, and he wrote it with Janet Morris, and that book claimed that there was a existence of weapon systems that operate on the power of the human mind and whose lethal capacity has already been demonstrated. But then, so he wrote about that in the book. But then Janet Morris, I found another newspaper article where Janet Morris stated that she was really smeared by John Alexander because he promised that he would reveal the sources and prove that of his claim, and he never did. So then he was also he was on the 2002 Naval Weapons Studies Board, that report that said EMR weapons were the thing of the future. So he's on that board, he's up there. And in the MarketWire, May 14th, 2003, it writes that he is a technical consultant to Tom Clancy, Michael Crichton, and Special Forces Guru forms consortium to develop multi-platform entertainment properties around futuristic warfare. So he is somebody that this article says he advised just about everybody in the military, the Pentagon, the CIA, Los Alamos, and NATO about how tomorrow's wars will be fought. and he's advising, the top people who are writing these books. And of course, what does he know that these authors are willing to listen to, that the government is willing to listen to? You can just kind of see how it plays out over 10 years. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but to me, I kind of wonder if it's disinformation and control of information. And so I thought that was really interesting. There's another, Jonathan Moreno. This is another example of the media and what they think of us. And Jonathan Moreno wrote Undue Risk. It was on secret experiments in 1999. It was reviewed by the New York Times, and he was an ethicist. He is an ethicist at the University of Virginia. And I've emailed him back and forth and, tried to get him interested in this. And, basically they can only go so far. I mean, he doesn't have proof of it, so he's open-minded, which is more than so many. But he wrote a recent article, February 2003. He wrote Nature Reviews Neuroscience. This is just to show you how neuroscience is controlled by the government. He wrote, Mind Wars. During the 1940s and 50s, the bulk of psychological research funding was provided by national security agencies that were interested in gaining an advantage during the Cold War. So I just didn't, okay. Then he writes about, later, he talks about these experiments have spawned a legion of conspiracy theorists prepared to entertain any rumored mind control technology without being inhibited by scientific implausibility. I mean, I understand. So basically, I think you can find a lot of articles out there that will show that actually mind control technology is plausible. And and as an ethicist, I don't think he would maybe do as thorough a research as that's just generally, I think I can refute that. I have a couple of articles that are pretty darn good, but he talks about one favorite worry of conspiracy theorists is that of long-range surveillance by state authorities. And so he argues back and forth, and I guess, it's to raise discussion that this neuroscience is, he talks about at the Stanford in San Francisco, there was a neuroscience conference, and they're talking about what are the laws going to be, how are we going to, what are the ethics of experimenting on the brain and controlling in these different technologies, because they're all really coming out into the public eye lately. So that was one article. And well, and then I just, in looking over these articles, I did find like inaccurate statements about experiments. And generally, the public is told that the experimentation today is safe and we have rules and don't worry about it. And there was 1976 LA Times article which talked about mind control. And of course, it brought this up. It actually said, experiments are safe. And so this is kind of what the public is told, and this is what you have to show, that actually they're not talking about classified experimentation. They're just talking about clinical experimentation when they make that statement. And of course, with this weapon research, it just is so unethical. It would have to be classified. I mean, they could never sell it to the public or anybody. And then there was a recent 2003 Boston Globe article, and they were talking about a neuroscience conference coming up. And I emailed her because she made no mention of all of the military research. And so she was nice enough to email me back and say that she forgot that aspect. She just, you know, it's just not in the public. Yeah. So, and that article also mentioned that experimentation was, you'll be safe. It was generally, that was the feeling. I don't have the exact quote, but. Oh, and I do have one favorite quote. I read the new book by Daniel Ellsberg on the Pentagon Papers, Secrecy. And he just had some great things to say about secrecy. And there's just one quote that I think really is important. It says, "It becomes clear that journalists had no idea, no clue, even the best of them, just how often and how egregiously they were lied to. The lies," and then he goes on, "It is a commonplace that you can't keep secrets in Washington, in a democracy. These truisms are flatly false. They are in fact cover stories, ways of flattering and misleading journalists and readers, part of the process of keeping secrets well. But the fact is that the overwhelming majority of secrets do not leak to the American public. The reality unknown to the public and to most members of Congress and the press is that secrets would be of the greatest import to many of them can be kept from them reliably for decades by the executive branch, even though they are known to thousands of insiders." I just think that really rings true. And should be given great weight when you look at the mind control issue. I mean, it's just mainstream media just doesn't cover the national security and a mind control type issue thoroughly. I mean, you really have to question it. You have to question the experts. I have one other great one that I was kind of floored by. Everyone knows that Wonder Weapons article on wonder weapons. That it's really quoted quite a lot and in the U.S. News. And one of the quotes in there, I highlighted it at the time, was about this Terry Hambrick. He was the head of the neuroprosthesis program at the NIH, and he was approached by the DARPA. I guess everybody knows DARPA, the DoD department, does a lot of research. He says, DARPA has come to us every few years to see if there are ways to incapacitate the central nervous system remotely. But nothing has ever come of it, he said. That's too science fiction and far-fetched. That was his quote. But what was really something was this article I just happened to run across. Hopefully I've got it here. Where it was this Electronic Times. It was a 1997 article, and he basically they had some questions about this new neural research, and the NIH would not comment. And then it went on. This article was talking about. It actually mentioned this Stanford scientist, and I'll get it for you. If anyone wants this article, I'll give you a copy. I just can't find it right now. But they were talking about the ethics of it, and he mentioned that a nutcase had come to him and really scared him, and claimed that he was being mind controlled, and they were talking about the perception that the public has. And Terry Hambrick was mentioned in that article, and he was the head of the program at the NIH, but they wouldn't accept interviews on their program. But they mentioned Delgado, which you saw the slide, of his research in the 60s on the implants. And the NIH funded his work, and that was the start of this implant neural research. And I can relate that to another article I read where Delgado came out in the I think it was the early 70s, 60s, very public, had lots of ideas about how this technology was going to affect us, and he lost his NIH funding after that. So, I mean, the government really wants to, they don't want to lose their funding. They don't want public input. They know the public controversy would be huge over this type of research. And so this article just said right out there, I mean, it was just a great example of how you have to be careful what you read. And
Hey, Cheryl, do you know if Terry Hambrick, related to Gary Hambrick, was working for the CIA for finding children to Aquino when he was torturing them?
don't know.
Sounds more than like
Yeah. Oh.
Right. San Francisco Presidio, he worked for daycare, and that was AIDS. They didn't do anything to him, or they promoted him. That's right.
That was, yeah, yeah, I don't know. Oh, there's the article. Yeah, I've got the article right here. You can look at it if you want afterwards. But oh, sure. Okay, this was February 10th, 1997, Electronic Engineering Times.
Wasn't Delgado paid by the Navy after he left?
Yeah, he had a lot of different funding. He did. He had CIA funding, according to Larry Collins. So, anyway, it's interesting that this article, this mainstream article, mentions Delgado, and it just fit right in over the history of it all. Okay. Well, okay, I'll give you a couple of articles of, which I'm not going in this direction anymore, but I just thought these articles were pretty darn good because people do want to know, you know, you get that asked a lot. How would this technology work? And generally, I'd like to be able to say, generally, there's a scientific theory, and this is feasible. And I did find a couple out there that mainstream are pretty darn interesting and the latest technology. So I'll get those. I thought this one was great. This was July 7th, let's see. This was 2003, May 1st, PBI Media. As a law student, you get the LexisNexis, and it's really great for doing research. This title was Raytheon touts hopes for, okay. The main part of this one was, Raytheon is working on one of the world's most thorough and comprehensive information gathering, processing, and execution networks responsible for a plethora of surveillance, reconnaissance, and defense-related missions within Brazil's spacious Amazon River area. The first is space-based assets, including satellite communication and remote sensors. And they've got this whole system using very high-frequency methods, and they're going to have the data from the sensors feed into the Air Surveillance Center and a coordination center, and they're going to monitor this whole Brazil region. And they're talking about defense law enforcement and environmental civil areas. And of course, they talk about the drugs and the different uses that they're using this technology. But to me, you know, you think 24 hours, 7 days a week, these victims are claiming they're being surveilled. They're saying their thoughts are being read, and you know, how could they possibly do that? And you know, this just kind of gives you a flavor for the fact that it's not that far-fetched. I mean, it is feasible. I mean, they want to monitor people down to the nth degree. They want to have that control over the environment. They've got sensors. They've got satellite. You know, so that was an interesting article. It's not the proof, but I mean, it really shows that it's not so far-fetched. And especially, I really don't know how they do it, the technology. But here's one more article. The Sunday Herald, June 22nd, 2003, talks about one of the exotic weapons in development is known as the Ground Moving Target Indicator. This would be a tracking device based in space which could pinpoint and follow the smallest of targets on Earth, the document says, and it will improve the ability to detect, locate, identify, and track a wide range of strategic and tactical targets we currently have minimal ability to detect, and targets that are hidden, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know the technology behind it, but from the satellite to be able to do something like that, it's a pretty big claim. I mean, it's close to what the victims are saying. So I have that article. And just a couple more. There's another one that has a radar where it can see through walls into the ground. I don't know. To me, it's not hard to believe, but for most people, it's very hard for them to believe. Here's one. Here's an article from July 7th, 2003. British troops try out James Bond-style X-ray specs. They've been carrying out secret tests on a revolutionary new device that allows them to see through walls, scientists have revealed. And it transmits low-frequency radar pulses that can pass through the walls and detect objects and movements. The machine's antenna sensors can pick up enough information to create sharp views on a screen of what is happening inside the room. So you can see how hard it is to prove a case like this. I mean, and people really want like 3-minute, prove it to me, I don't have time. They care, but it's not a popular topic. It's a hard one to discuss. There was one more article. There's the other government report that I don't think I mentioned that was important was the converging technologies for improving human performance, the new nanotechnology, biotech, information tech, and cognitive science. This is National Science Foundation. This is mainstream government. And they've got a section in there on national security. They're talking about, of course, the Human Cognome Project. They want to start that. That's actually what they call it. They want to launch that. So, I mean, it's feasible that they could figure out how the brain works and really get it down to a science. I mean, you can certainly believe that. And then a couple more. Let's see, converging. Okay. There was an article in the Technology Review, May 1st, 2003, Mind-Machine Merger, 24 million government initiative, and they want to work on linking brains and computers. So one of the descriptions in there was, it said, the quote, I always like these quotes, of course, although such applications are as speculative as they are spectacular, scientists no longer view them as pure fantasy. I mean, there's really theory behind it, and I think you can prove that today. You can prove that control of the brain is not science fiction. It's a real scientific theory, and they're putting a lot of government money into these programs. And if anyone's interested, I have these articles, but if you want to take the time, I haven't condensed them down, and that's always a process. And okay, so I thought this one was pretty interesting. Of course, they're talking about doing this on monkeys, but they're talking about control signals will pass back and forth via the internet, and the monkey will monitor graphical representation of the robot's position and movements on the screen. This one was different, though, because it talked about input and output, and how they were going to take the monkey's brain signals, put it into the computer, and then they were going to feed back a brain signal, and hopefully it would do the same thing. The monkey would get, they gave one example where they had the monkey see a cat or a dog and discern between a cat or a dog, and the different brain signal would be different for each one, and they were going to play with that and see if they could get them to see a cat when there was a dog there by a different brain signal. Things like that. It was a good article. Yeah. So they're talking about, the ultimate vision is to connect the readout and write-in technologies enabling computer-mediated brain-to-brain communication. This is a DARPA initiative. Scientists at Vanderbilt University have proposed to build and test it, and so they're talking about doing it in the auditory also, auditory region. And what I found interesting, at the end of the article it says, if a non-invasive tool can be found to extract the same kinds of information, because they had to have these really thin implants, they still had to have implants to get the signal. If they say if a non-invasive tool can be found to extract the same kind of information, then the sky's the limit, basically, is what they say. So I just happened, in the Converging Technologies article, in the National Security section, it actually says this. Applications of brain-machine interface. The convergence of all four, the ones I said, NBIC fields, will give war fighters the ability to control complex entities by sending control actions prior to thoughts being fully formed. The intent is to take brain signals, nanotechnology, for augmented sensitivity and non-intrusive signal detection and use them in a control strategy, information technology, and then impart back into the brain the sensations of feedback signals, biotech. But they actually talk about non-intrusive signal detection, and there actually is a way of doing that with this nanotechnology. And so they found it. They were looking for it, and they found it. They just haven't developed it. So it is based in, it's scientifically feasible to do these things. But I know it's a long shot. It's hard for people. But that's kind of what I've really tried to do, is get mainstream involved, get regular people, non-victims involved, because that's really, if we're going to make any progress, you really, that's the only, I really have tried everything, but I'm ending up with this. So, I always hope that I can save people time, and because I find the victims do the same thing. I went to the FBI, I did all those things, and now I look back and think, why did I go to the FBI? I just thought they would believe me. Because you experience it and it's so real.
They did believe it, that's the problem.
Yeah.
We know you.
Do you find that,
Oh, well, sorry. Oh, well, those, I guess, the bottom line is I feel like the public will support us if they have the facts. That's the government's big fear, that's why they keep this so classified. That's where some of our power lies. So, I haven't found the answer, but I keep looking, and I just thought that at least there's something to work on. I feel like it's not hopeless. It's been a tough learning experience, though, because of how slow it is, and how I'm disappointed that the system didn't work, and just how it does work for radiation victims, and I don't know. So that was the main thing I had to say. And if anyone has any questions, or
did you find that
thank you.
in some of doing the same things that you did, as you said before, did you find that some of the groups called like Narcotics Task Force was really AKA drug cartel connected to the CIA? That's what happened to us when we started looking. Only there's no admitting of any of this. But they all seem to be connected, and those of us who are being abused, we go just like you did. We go to the FBI, we're told this. The only ones that helped us were retired FBI that verified what kind of things were going on, what kind of implants, and we were told they take no prisoners, and the kind of implants that we have are going, they're going to use us until they don't need us, and then they run whatever they want, and we're gone.
Yeah, I really believe that we're going to have to stop them. They're not going to just stop. It's a fight. And there are a lot of victims that claim that they have that drug connection, and they think somehow the DEA is involved. And I think a lot of the intelligence agencies have this technology, because I hear from a lot of victims who are like, say they were whistleblowers, or they crossed somebody and then they were targeted. I can't believe at that low level how they would have, but I've heard it enough to really believe it. So it's like, yeah, and
the agencies have their own independent operations.
yeah, I just think the technology is spread out in a lot of different agencies, but well, it's like the radiation and the atomic bomb. I think it's that kind of umbrella projects, and just lots of different agencies, big bureaucracy. Somebody over here doesn't know what somebody over here is doing, but I think it's low enough level, where, gee, you hear the stories of people in the military husbands who target wives, I don't know, you hear it quite often, so it just needs to be investigated. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I avoid talking about it because you just sound like a kook. You can't prove it. I've tried to document it. I hired a private investigator. I went to Europe. They told me to go out of the country. I went across state. I have a lot of what they call the street theater. I don't have a lot of the physical problems where you'll never believe it. So, but really? Well, yeah. Well,
Some other people may
Yeah.
experience what you experience,
yeah. Well, it's like the stories on the Mind Control Forum. I mean, bits and pieces, but just they can engineer your life basically, and it's like Delgado, and you can target one person, and you can now target groups of people, and so they engineer harassment all day. It's just like a stress-inducing program. I mean, they're always trying to break you down. If you read the definition of torture, they try to break your personality. That Jolly West and his 3Ds, dread, disability, and I can't remember the third one, but they have the science of torture down, and that's, whether it's high tech, done by high tech, or, physically, it's the same. So it's those, so it just sounds really nuts that, but I've tried to document it. I've tried scientifically I'll just tell you one thing I tried was, wherever I would go, there would be red cars and white cars.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds nuts. And that's a sign of mental illness,
Yeah, it is,
but-
very organized.
So I took videotape. I used to carry a camcorder around 24 hours a day because I thought, I'm going to, they'll see this, they'll know I'm being harassed. And so I got a statistics professor at UC Davis and gave her the videotapes, and she said that it was statistically relevant, that there was an abnormal, it was on University Avenue in Berkeley, a half-an-hour tape, and there was a high statistical amount of red cars and white cars. How could they possibly do that? You can't. So it's a long story, but
Years ago.
yeah, right.
What they told me was that
I
there
hear
was
it
a
from a lot
fella
of victims.
who had been the chief sheriff in a certain area in Southern Cal. And he was kind of run out of there indiscreetly, and then he ended up going to be the chief of police in Escondido, California, which was the methamphetamine capital of the United States. When that happened, they did everything in color codes. And those that they thought they could trust, that had helped the police before, they intervened with this system. And if your neighbor was,
Yeah, they
you
did a
know.
lot of electric.
Yeah.
Like people with it's just really it's that crazy sounding, but
that's what they did.
yeah,
And that's therefore the red car was representing fear or stop, and the
Right.
yellow was caution, and I don't know what the blue and green and white were.
Get the name of the person who supplies Michael Crichton and Clancy to the military with information.
yeah,
Who was
John,
that person?
John Alexander, yeah.
In your anecdotes, have you heard any people who have suggested that there have been people on the other side that have tried to help them? In other words, people who, not whistleblowers so much as, I do what I could, but have you heard any stories like that?
Well, I never had the inside scoop. I've never had inside information. I never got that kind of information. And, somebody like Walter Boert, who wrote Operation Mind Control, maybe got some information, but I don't think the insiders are going to talk.
Well, all the time, I went out of the
I don't know.
it's a little better than you suggest.
Yeah.
A lot of people who are
Yeah, I don't have the answers. I keep studying it and trying to figure it out.
Cheryl, talking about John Alexander. Mary Ann was real shrewd last year. She had her conference in L.A., North L.A., on a Saturday, which happened to be the 33rd day of the year, Groundhog Day, which people don't even understand. It gets back to the numerology of the occult. But what I want to point out is she had Dr. Alexander speak there to pick his brain, and so she had me speak first, then Ted. So for 2 hours, we were setting this piece of scum up, blasting him away without even mentioning him or his book. And then what could he do? I mean, it was so true the way she did it. And he just stood there and didn't know what to say. So he said, you're hearing a lot of disinformation and confusing facts that have no value, et cetera, et cetera. But he couldn't refute anything we said because we have all this documentation. And I bring this up because of the fact, if you read one of Chris Springmeier's books, he says, quoting Sister Wheeler, who was Illuminati mother goddess, or what they call it, mother of darkness, she says that Alexander is in the Illuminati and does human sacrifices. It's all in the book.
He's into paranormal. For the record, in Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, it says he's into real strange esoteric research. It's in the press, that he's kind of an unusual guy. But here he is, a big advisor, and to me, it was just really interesting. So. No, I really don't.
Could you repeat the question?
Wait, what was it?
Oh, okay.
Wait a second. Hey, can you get this on when you talk so low?
No, I'll just raise my voice. I was targeted for about 2.5 years, then they let me go for 7 months. And then I read stuff on the internet and responded to it, and then they were right on me again. So for 7 months, no symptoms of anything. I was in total isolation, back to like being a normal human being.
I met someone where I live she listened to my complaints and my stories about sleep loss and harassment for like 2 years before she admitted to me. She said, briefly, Linda, I know all about frequencies. She goes, I used to be on the internet 24/7. And she goes, yeah, there was something going on. And so over a short period of time, I probed her with questions and kind of picked her brain as much as I did, but she didn't want it. But she said when she went off the internet, within 6 months, it stopped. And she said, we've got to get you off the internet. But I said, no, I'm not going off the internet. And she almost regretted that she had said that to me, because you would never guess it. But after that, when I would try to talk to her at this one coffee shop, there was always this one guy who would always be with her while she's doing the crossword puzzle. And I couldn't get a word in edgewise. And I tried to ask questions, and he'd say, let's go, and get her out of there. And now, turns out she comes to that place 6 o'clock in the morning. She's there like 10 minutes. He's there then too. But she's no longer targeted. But she is, I think, perhaps, unless you're just a very good friend, she's sort of like minded or something, and like maybe monitored. But I dared not say more because she's happy to be rid of that stuff.
You're not kidding. Can she? Okay, go ahead, and then I'll get you. Sorry.
Do you know where they chose you? Were you in the military or government or?
Yeah, my guess is that I happened to go to the Marines and Army. I was the recruiting offices, and I was thinking of joining, and then I decided to go to UC Davis instead. I got a bachelor's degree in physical education, nothing to do with, secrecy or anything. But that's when all the stuff started to happen. So, and then with talking to the victims and just hearing a lot where there's a military connection. But I don't know for sure, but it sure all started about then. So.
this article that this interests me, the secret testing that allowed to see through walls, July 7, 2003, what was the name of the newspaper?
I can get that for you after the talk. Be glad to, any of them, yeah. So, okay.
Hi. I did hear you say that you didn't feel that you had any hope. I was wondering, when you went to court, now I noticed that a lot of people, I did think the legal aspect, but I'm in the medical field now. As far as, what I was saying is that when you brought a case, was it under assault and battery of the brain? How was it presented? And what I was saying is, most people are not giving evidence. Is there someone who is actually bringing in copies of the brain of the electronic? It can be detected. Why isn't that being brought forth when the case is presented?
Yeah, I'm only a third-year student, so I can only just generally talk. And just there's been a couple of court cases, but they've on mind control, but they've all been dismissed. And well, they never got that far, But yeah. Well, there's one. Does everyone know Harlan Gerard and his group back in Philadelphia and his court case? That was reported in Microwave News, and he technical reasons like lack of standing, and but the government's argument was really interesting. I mean, this was a federal case. Yeah, I can get that for you. Yeah. No. Yeah. No. Oh, that you can get the evidence. Well, you have to tie it to the government is the other big deal,
Establish that who has access to these chips, not us in here, but who has the actual
It's really
access
like
to these neural chips, and who's the people who distribute them, the manufacturer of these chips. It's not the people in this room who has access to them. So we is able to carry out these experiments.
Yeah, that's a big job. You just have no idea of how people have tried.
But it has to be brought carefully, because it just seems like everybody's giving up hope to be for financial restitution for what is being done to them as far. I just think it's the way the case is being presented.
Sure. Yeah.
In your research, the non-lethal weapons and mind control weapons, what percentage would you allocate to direct government control laboratories in development, private contractor laboratories, or universities? How's it spread percentage-wise on the development?
On the development of the technology or of what?
Non-lethal weapons
Of
and
non.
mind
Oh.
control research that will apply to weapons. How would you divide the development allocation, say the ASCO, of the money spent between those companies? There are direct control laboratories, subcontractors that have been cleared for security, and the third being research in secret research in the universities.
Yeah. Well, I really used the model of like the MK Ultra program where 80 institutions were involved and they do this basic research. I just don't know. Just my research, I suspect, but I just, the non-lethal weapons, all of those I have like 24 articles in here, and they say, we can't even evaluate non-lethal weapons because it's so heavily classified, and that's why they couldn't ban them. They banned blinding lasers. They were able to do that. And this one article says they were not able to, they consider these weapons inhumane and what they're talking about, but they can't ban them because it's classified and they don't have that information. So, what I said today is basically my level of knowledge. I just don't know.
Support groups and networks of people that, other than the internet, that can actually physically get together, discuss coping techniques, share their stories and how they handle it and what they do? Or is this something that the various agencies try to break apart and make sure they don't get formed? And,
No, Networking works just fine. You know, I haven't heard bad things, generally speaking, about networking, and it's just a matter of people organizing, and, you know, it's kind of a self-help thing. You know, you kind of have to start it yourself, and there's certainly people out there, and you could announce it, but I don't know of any ongoing program. I hear that request, not really often, but you...
I've been driven all over the country. I've been homes and jobs for years, and I never get to be situated long enough to connect with people.
Yeah, people have suggested having...
You know, I wanted to find books here because to try to order them, you know, the Postal Service is federal, and sometimes they're federal athletes, toss and break things and try to send in the mail. And, you know, I mean, a lot of times there's so much interference, even if I get the stability, that it's almost, I had to come from LA to here with someone who's living in Spain in Florida right now, and I don't know how long that'll last before they break that up.
Can I
And
talk?
I'm living under a bridge or out in the woods again.
I need to talk with you, because that's what they're doing with me. By the way, I'm highly trained by the Cheryl. Okay.
Are they trained in what?
What?
Highly trained in
I'm highly trained by the people, by what you might call the shadow government. All right, that's the partially answer to the question. You know, all this stuff has been going on for hundreds of years, and the world has worked the same in this epoch, which you might call about 6,000 years that we know it, you know. Whether there was a flood before the pyramid or not is immaterial. But the point, this epoch is relatively new, and it's always works the same. And it's a pyramid. And our government is controlled by the money. The money that's in your pocket, it says Federal Reserve, is like the Federal Express. It's not federal, it's not a reserve. It's a closed corp. I work for the guy who prints that money. He called one of the guys, he calls himself Ralph Dorian. That's not his real name. His real name is Rothschild. He made a movie, you know, called The Truman Show, to spoof something. You might have seen that movie, The Truman Show.
Yeah, well, that's based on me.
Yeah, well, it's probably based on a lot of people. You know, I tell you, but what they don't tell you, what they're doing to me, okay, they hit me with toxins, all right. Maybe there's a number of neurotoxins that they hit me continuously with, street theater. I don't tell anybody about this. I've never been on the net, because in my opinion, it's between me and my maker, okay? It doesn't do any good. But they you know, I'm selling. You know, I could go into the grotesque things that they have to basically, they keep me weak by walking.
Yeah.
They keep me like hurt. They refuse. And by the way, I know, you know, I was trained in these, to take away power, you got to move somebody out of their space. So they move me out of my space all the time.
Well, yeah, that's something that you would talk about in a group, and you know, people do on one-on-one and whatever you're comfortable with. I mean, there's like 1,800 people have contacted my group, and certainly people can network. I can give you names, and one, you know, a couple more than once, people have said we should have a home, like a group home. A lot of people, you know, are being harassed and having to move around, different things, but you know, it just the people are usually so harassed that they can't organize enough, don't have the funds, you know, and you know, part of their thing is to financially drain you, and just in all ways, socially, and so it's just, it hasn't happened. And my group's really small, and we have very few funds, and so, you know, I just don't have the help that people really need. It's really tough, but...
What I like to do is, I don't have time to meet everybody, but my email address, vitamins, vitamins@msn.com. What I like to do is have you email me, and then let me know if you would like me to send your email address to someone else. So that's a way that we could get a group together here. vitamins, vitamins.
Does anybody here want to meet at a library anywhere in the area within about 2 or 3 weeks? I mean, it seems to me that, I mean, if you got to just make people concerned about it, then I mean, if there's no other conferences coming up, then I mean, I think we should.
I have a question. Does anybody want to do
discussions, but I have a question. Do you have a website or any other contact information for people who might be interested in?
Yeah, at this point, my website address is so long. If you just do a keyword search for Cheryl Welsh, that really is the easiest. Yeah. Oh, yeah, if you have a program and it's on there. Yeah. Sure. Okay. Go ahead. Sorry. Last question, I guess.
I'm going to just say that what a number of you are talking about is a term that the military uses along with other covert activities. It's called destabilization of your life. And so these different individual methods to destabilize you economically, by limiting the friends that you can have for support basis and so on and so forth. Destabilization.
Well, that's it for me, and I know it's been an hour, so I'll leave it up to you if you want to talk more. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, we want to